Welcome to the Lowenstein-Sandler podcast series, the Women's Initiative Network, Real Talk. I'm Amanda Cipriano, an associate attorney and member of the Women's Initiative Network at Lowenstein-Sandler. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast series at lowenstein.com/podcasts, or find us on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. Now let's take a listen.
Welcome back to the Women's Initiative Network, Real Talk. I'm one of your hosts, Rachel Dickovics. I'm a white-collar criminal defense attorney at Lowenstein-Sandler.
And I'm one of your other hosts, Megan Munson, counsel in Lowenstein-Sandler's Employee Benefits and Executive Compensation Practice Group. And today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by a guest speaker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chandra Shee. I'm a partner here at Lowenstein-Sandler in our tech group on what we lovingly refer to as the Deal Team.
Thanks, Chandra. On this episode of Real Talk, we're focusing on how important it is for professional women to find mentors and sponsors. According to Sylvia Ann Hewitt, author of the book, Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor, women are only half as likely as men to have a sponsor who helps to guide their career and build their network. Together, mentors and sponsors can serve as your own sort of personal board of directors. Today, we're discussing the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, how to find each of them, and their importance to your career development. Let's dive right in. Starting with the basics. Chandra, what do you think the difference is between a sponsor and a mentor?
I think for me, the interesting thing about sponsors and mentors is that they can be the same person, but there really is a difference in my mind. You know, a mentor can really be anyone in your life who helps shape your personal or professional development in one way or another. It can be teachers, it can be coaches, it could be friends or family, it could be people at work, but they're not necessarily people who have to have an impact in advancing your career. For me, I think sponsors are people who can have and do have a direct impact in advancing your career. And I kind of think of a sponsor as a champion, someone who at your place of work or at the organization that you're at and looking to advance in is advocating for you and with you, even in rooms that you're not in. And, you know, I think for me, having both is important, but for career advancement, having sponsors is hugely important.
Yeah, and I echo everything Chandra said. And, you know, at a more junior level, it's going to be much more common to have mentors and have a multitude of mentors, whether it's people you've met at a professional capacity, whether it's people in your personal life. But those are people who are really providing you advice and guidance as you navigate through the ropes of your career in practicing law or whatever other professional career you're in. I think as you get a little bit more senior and you're looking at where you want your career to go, that's definitely when a sponsor is going to come into play and really help guide you and finding you those opportunities for advancement to take your career to the next level.
So how did each of you meet the mentors and sponsors that are part of your lives today?
So that's a great question. Interestingly enough, when I was in law school, I joined a bunch of organizations where I was getting lined up with various mentors. And at that point in my career, albeit early on, I thought that's how you would find the people who are going to be guiding you and providing you advice throughout your career, kind of these arbitrary matchups. And I went to lunch with those people and kind of had a cursory level relationship, but it didn't really go anywhere. I mean, it was interesting to hear about their career paths and how they got to where they were, but they didn't really take much interest in my growth. And I just didn't have a natural connection with them. So I found that as I started actually practicing, really the best relationships that I've built in terms of mentors and sponsors happened organically. And they were just by function of the people that I was either working with in my practice group, you know, doing good work. So people would take an interest in me, then giving me more opportunities. And it just became kind of a two-way street. Or just, and also, you know, even currently in my current role, meeting people in our women's organization. And it was really just building those relationships and finding people that you connected with on a personal level as well as a professional level, because you want to have it be a relationship that not only, you know, you're enjoying putting the time in and spending with it, but also spending time with somebody who you respect and is going to be providing you guidance that you appreciate and would actually, you know, take them up on.
I agree with that completely. I think the most valuable sponsor and mentor relationships in my life are ones that definitely came about organically, you know, sharing interests, and just generally being able to have a conversation with the person, feel comfortable discussing sensitive things like what your sort of hopes and dreams and goals are for your career and your life. It helps a lot when you can have those kind of conversations with people that you trust, and even better if they're people that you view as sort of role models for yourself, right? People that you sort of want to mirror your life after or mirror your career after. And, getting to meet people that you sort of want to step into their shoes is a huge opportunity. And I do think working at a law firm, for example, with lots of other attorneys who've been doing this for a while is just a great opportunity to find and meet people who can be potential mentors or sponsors for you. And I think it's easier to do that once you've started your professional career than when you're in law school, unfortunately. Because I agree, Megan, it feels a little like speed dating when you're trying to meet potential mentors who, are gracious and have volunteered their time to come and meet you, but it almost feels a little forced and you just sort of don't know what you have in common. You don't know what you're looking to do or what your career is going to shape like. And so I think those relationships are still very worthwhile and you should pursue them because you might hit it off with someone and it's great. But I also feel like don't feel guilty if you have to let some of those go, because just not everything's sustainable and you have to sort of focus your energy on the things that sort of click and work.
No, and that's actually a really good point, is that it may serve just a different purpose, I think, than what you were initially expecting. Because even, starting out, some of the mentors I had when I first started practicing law are not the same mentors that I have now. And so those relationships are going to change as your career develops. You could still maintain some of the same mentors throughout your career, but you're going to pick up other people along the way and your network is going to build.
A funny concept that I hadn't thought about, but that I have seen people discuss recently is the idea of shifting roles. And, at some point in your life, people who may have been mentors to you, you end up as peers, or maybe you've surpassed them in one way or another from a career perspective, right? And you start to fall out of that mentor-mentee relationship, but it doesn't still mean you can't have a great friendship. And it's just interesting because it's, I think, a natural evolution.
Absolutely. Can you each talk a little bit about the way that you each interact with both your mentors and sponsors today? What do you go to each of those people for?
So that's a really good question. I'd say for me, most often I go to my mentor on a much more frequent basis, and definitely when I'm looking for, I'll say, more general advice or guidance, whether it's not even necessarily on a particular legal issue, but just trying to navigate, certain things. Like, for example, going on maternity leave, right? Like navigating through firm policies and how to figure out the best way to do that and keeping your docket full. Like that's kind of, I would say, a more personal level discussion. And at least for me, I find sometimes my mentors are either people that I can have that personal level of connection with, so I feel comfortable having those relationships and discussions, similar to having discussions about work-life balance and just figuring out how to do a good job, have a great career, meet all my career goals, but not losing myself in the process, because those people have already been there. And as Chandra said, I kind of look to them as a role model. Also on the substantive side, at least some of my professional mentors, I also go to them for guidance, just, learning about their career path or on a particular substantive issue that I know that they have more experience on, to just bounce ideas off of. Versus utilizing my sponsor, I'd say, is more so when I'm thinking about my long-term career goals and what even my short-term goals are to get me there and how to get to that next level. So having, I would say, more career-focused discussions about where I want my career to go, how I think it can get there, and talking to that person about what kind of opportunities I can utilize to make those next steps.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I agree with all of them. I think the only other thing I'd add is staying in communication with people, just generally giving them updates about yourself, even if you don't need advice or you don't need, hey, what is my next stepping stone in my career? It helps people feel like they're part of your journey. And the last thing you want to do is take people like your sponsors or your mentors by surprise. And so if they feel like they are having regular conversations with you They know what's going on. I think it just creates a stronger bond, and it also allows them to be empowered to help you in ways that you may not even realize, right? A mentor or a sponsor may recognize if they feel like something's off with you lately, right? And maybe it's that you do need help in some way, but you haven't realized it. Or maybe you do have big life events coming up, right? Like going on maternity leave or other stuff. And how is that going to impact your career development? And you may be thinking about it, but not voicing it. And having those people in the loop, knowing what's going on, it gives them the opportunity to check in with you as well. And I think that's what makes a really, really successful relationship, is just sort of having it be a two-way street. You always want to be the one who's advocating for yourself and making the effort, because chances are your sponsor or your mentor have other people that they are also, sponsoring or mentoring. And so they're busy. But, really take it upon yourself to make sure that you're part of their life in a meaningful way. And I think it helps both of you.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, because, in thinking about the relationships I have with those folks in my circle, even if there's not anything really I particularly want to talk about with them, I'll still schedule time maybe every other month to have a catch up and get some coffee and just keep that personal connection going. And so to your point, it's making sure not only they're invested and understand where things are from a professional side, but you're still maintaining that relationship because you've developed those relationships with people because they're invested in you, you get along, you have a good personal connection, and you want to spend time with those people. And so just making sure to continue to take time and invest it both in yourself and that relationship, I think is key. And to the point you made about it being a two-way street, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think anyone who's going to be a sponsor or mentor is taking time out of their already busy schedule. And so you want to make sure that not only you're making the best use of their time, but also think of ways that you can try to make their lives easier or better in some capacity as well. And I think that always just, again, are things that, they're helping you out and giving you advice. So you want to be reciprocal and see what you can do to help them.
I totally agree with all those points. And specifically what Chandra mentioned about keeping in touch with people, I think is really critical to maintaining both sponsor and mentor relationships. I know one thing that I've tried to do is keep in touch with people from previous jobs and even previous, parts of my career. And you really never know how those connections may be helpful to you in the future. So the more that you can keep those relationships alive, the better. And that leads me to another question, which is, do you think that it's important to have mentors and sponsors both at your place of work and externally, or do you think it's okay to have them just internally?
So I think it's important to have mentors in sort of all facets of your life. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you only have mentors at work, because, we're whole people who aren't just machines that work our entire lives and have nothing else going on. And so I think, you're almost doing yourself a disservice by neglecting these other parts of your life if you don't sort of have folks that you look up to or lean on in that sort of mentor capacity in the outside world, right? For sponsors, I think, the answer is it depends. Certainly having sponsors internally at your sort of workplace or an organization that you're at, maybe you volunteer somewhere or you're part of some nonprofit or something, right? It is important. I think it's possible to have sponsors outside, and we all, have different career and life aspirations. And so, it's probably something that's an evolution, but I also think it's hard to maintain a sponsor relationship with someone who's not going to directly impact something in your life right now or in the immediate future, just because from a practical perspective, sort of where and why and how are they sponsoring you, right?
Yeah, but your point about the mentors, I think, makes a lot of sense. I mean, you not only need mentors in your professional relationships, but also in your personal lives as well. And honestly, even having mentors that are counseling you on your professional goals and giving you advice that are from outside your current employer, it just gives you additional perspective and another set of eyes and ears. So I think it just gives you, again, a more holistic picture of everything and more things to consider. So I think it's great to have mentors from all across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely take the point that it's especially important to have a sponsor within your organization. I think sponsors are people who will speak up about you and for you in the room when you're not there. And to some extent, I think that that can exist externally as well, especially in a field like ours, where we're trying to bring business into our firm and meet new people and attract new clients. Sometimes I think external sponsors can be people who mention you to their contacts and say, Megan might be able to do this for you. You should meet her, which I think can be equally important as your internal sponsors for the long term.
That's a great point.
So over the past now year and a half, getting scarily close to 2 years, things have changed significantly in our work and home landscapes. So have you found that since COVID happened, we're working remotely, we're seeing each other at events less frequently, have your mentor and sponsor relationships been impacted either positively or negatively by those changes?
For me, I was able to keep them pretty well in check, but that's really, I think, requires more effort on my part to set up those coffee dates or those happy hours or even getting together for outdoor lunch, because it doesn't happen as organically, especially for the people in the office where I would normally just bump into and then we'd grab lunch. So it just requires, I think, a lot more effort. I do think, though, it's a lot more challenging for the junior attorneys who are just starting to practice now and don't already have those relationships in place that they're, again, just continuing to foster. Because I think it's just a lot easier for me to say, shoot an email to one of my mentors and say, hey, do you want to grab coffee? Versus if it's somebody that you've never met in person or have only met once, it can be a bit overwhelming to make that initial step and to make those connections. So I think it takes a little bit more effort now.
I agree. I think, having the benefit of years of sort of a relationship already with my mentors and sponsors, it's, it hasn't felt all that different, but I do really feel for people who are trying to establish relationships, because I think at the end of the day, it takes you back to sort of that speed dating feeling again, right? And, I don't know what the answer is to try to make it easier, but I do think that, it's much harder to organically form relationships with and meet people virtually as compared to sort of when we're in the office doing events, you're chit-chatting in between sessions, or you're, who knows what, right? But it's hard. And I think it's something we're going to have to try to tackle together, because we don't really know when we get to go back to quote unquote normal.
No, that's true. And, especially as you're coming in as a junior attorney, it's intimidating in general, let alone, even more so if you're trying to network and get to know people on a more personal level. One of the things that I've at least tried to do when we've gotten like the new class of first years or the summer associates is setting up like an informal get together with them so that they just have another familiar face at the firm. And even for a couple, then, taking the time and asking them for one-on-one coffee, because it's something that, I almost wish that somebody would have done for me at that level. And because I know that, as you said, Chandra, it's a much more challenging environment, I do try to be a little bit more cognizant about the effort, on the more senior attorney side, to do things like that, to try to help them at least have one point of connection going forward.
Yeah. And one thing, especially in the context of remote work or a hybrid work schedule, where sometimes we're seeing each other in person, sometimes we're not, we don't know when that's going to happen and when it isn't. We can also sometimes lean on our mentors to help us find sponsors. And I think that that's especially important for more junior attorneys, to utilize your mentors to help you make connections to the more senior people who are then going to be able to advocate for you going forward, who will get to know you and get to know your work. It can be very helpful to have someone link you when you're the new person and the most junior person. Having somebody vouch for you to a more senior person, I think, can be really helpful in establishing a relationship with that more senior person, where otherwise it might kind of take you a while to make that connection and get them to be interested in you at a level where they can potentially become a sponsor for you.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And one of the actually, I would say, benefits from being in this kind of remote virtual environment is that, at least in the firm that I work in, it's broken down a lot of the barriers in terms of cross office work. While there was always a sense of camaraderie and working with other people cross offices, because everyone was just getting so much more comfortable in doing these Zoom video chats. Even as someone at my level, I found it was a good opportunity to reach out to other partners in other offices and get to know them, or taking on new marketing opportunities and sending it their way. So I feel like it almost gave me a little bit more confidence to do things like that, because it was a little bit more mainstream versus if they were people who I would have, not been in the office with them physically and maybe would have been hesitant to contact.
Totally agree. Do you think that as a woman attorney, it's important to have mentors and sponsors who are women?
I think so. There's the well-known saying at this point that representation matters. And I think especially when you're first embarking on your career, being able to see someone who sort of looks like you or who you can relate to in some way or another that has been successful and made it and holds leadership positions at the place you work, and generally someone you view as a model for how you might want your career or life to look, makes a huge difference. If you show up somewhere and nobody looks like you, nobody can sort of share your experiences or understands what it's like to maybe want to be a working professional, but also be a mom, or also, do this or that. I mean, it's hard to picture yourself succeeding in that environment. And so it doesn't mean it's not possible, but I do think that finding mentors or finding sponsors who are women is just one extra tool in the toolkit that you can have. And I think it helps give you confidence in a way that you may not realize.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, certainly having male sponsors and mentors has its purpose, and it's great for us to have those people in our networks too. But to Chandra's point, it just, I think, helps when you have somebody that you can kind of envision that that's where you want your career to go. And it's kind of that almost implicit bias that you just feel a little bit more comfortable with somebody potentially because they look like you, they're in these great leadership roles, and that's really where you want to see your career going. And they've been through kind of some of the same issues that you're facing. And unfortunately, there are certain challenges that women in professional settings face that our male colleagues don't.
Yeah, Megan, I was just thinking about how the legal field is still really heavily male dominated, especially as seniority grows, the number of women increase. So while a starting associate class may be 50-50 male, female, or there may even be more women than men, as people get more senior, those numbers drop off because there are realities for women that still exist. And, frequently women have to take the primary role as caregiver, and their careers are impacted in a way that, their partners often are not. And so it's important and helpful, I think, to have female sponsors and mentors who understand where you are in your life, what challenges outside of the workplace you may be facing. And I think that it's also incumbent upon all of us as women attorneys to focus on and make a conscious effort to be mentors to others, even if they're not asking us for it. Madeleine Albright famously said, there is a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And I think it's so important, especially as a woman in a male-dominated field, when someone has held a door open for you figuratively. If you don't hold it open for the woman who's coming down the hall behind you, you're really not doing the most that you can to advance women in the legal field generally. So on that note, do you all have any tips for being an effective mentor or sponsor?
I think for me, one of the biggest lessons in mentoring is listening. Being a good listener really helps shape the way you can impact someone's life or career. Not everyone wants or needs the same thing. And so I think if you just assume what worked for you or what you were interested in is what everyone wants, you're doing a disservice to the people who are looking to you as a mentor. And so really, ask them what they want and ask them sort of what their aspirations are and ask them how you can help, because it might be something completely different than what you would have expected or how you thought you might have been helpful. And it's an amazing thing because you can actually be helpful to people in ways that you don't even realize. But if you don't ask the questions and you don't listen to the answers, you miss out on a lot of that.
And I think in addition to that, it's also just making the time for people, because as we said before, as attorneys and anyone who's in a professional job, you're really busy. But as Rachel mentioned, for most of us, we've gotten to where we are, and there's been somebody or more than one somebody's who's helped us along the way and been holding those doors open for other women and helping you progress through the career ladder. So it's really important not only to give back to others who are coming up behind you and making the time to share your experiences with them, but also to what Chandra mentioned, listening to them and seeing, because their career path is not necessarily the same as yours, but they also want to just learn from your experiences. And because you've been working and practicing for longer, you're just going to come at things from a different perspective.
I definitely agree with all of those things. I think in addition to being a good listener, it's important as a mentor to offer the things that you can provide, because sometimes your mentee is not going to realize the ways in which you can help them. From something as simple as, one of my more junior colleagues might say to me, have you ever filed a brief in the New York commercial division? Because they're probably working on one and they are looking for a sample, but maybe they don't want to ask me for a sample because they don't realize that I might have one, but I do. So I say, hey, I will send you a sample, and that helps them out. To offering other connections, just other things that you can provide that the person who you are looking to assist and mentor and guide may not realize that you can do for them, can be really helpful as well.
And I think on the mentor side in particular, also if you're mentoring someone on more substantive issues, at least if it's somebody in your own organization, walking them through and explaining things to them, I think also really helps, because that kind of goes back to the listening point that it's people may not understand why something's wrong or how to do things a particular way. But if you take the time to explain it to them, that goes a long way too.
So what tips can we give people for how to be an effective mentee and somebody who people will want to mentor?
So that's a great question. I know we touched on it briefly earlier, but I think one of the things is trying to make the lives of your mentors or sponsors easier, right? So whether it's if you're somebody you're working with directly, let's say, and they're assigning you work, one of the easiest, quickest ways to grow that relationship is by doing a good job, showing eagerness, and kind of anticipating what that senior attorney is going to need out of that assignment. So in effect, you're making their lives easier, you're saving them time. So they're going to not only want to spend more time developing you and guiding you, but you're also freeing up some time on their docket to do that.
Yeah, I think definitely making people's lives easier, always a welcome thing. Showing an interest is, I think, a huge factor as well. I'm 10 times happier to explain things to people or spend extra time with someone or go out of my way to do something if I feel like the person is really interested and wants to learn and wants to grow or wants to develop. We spend a lot of time doing our jobs, and we've spent a lot of time trying to become experts at what we do. And when someone's actually really interested in it, not just how do I get the task done, but could you explain this to me? Or here's what I was thinking, and you said X instead of Y, and I wasn't sure why you did that, and I was curious about it. That to me just goes such a long way. And, it helps build a better organic relationship as well, because, I might know that you're interested in something because you've expressed an interest in it and invite you to something related to that, or want to reach out and, initiate a conversation about something where I might not if I hadn't realized. And so that kind of a thing goes a long way as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that people love to talk about themselves. So one of the best ways to be somebody who people will want to mentor and just be around in a professional setting is to ask them questions about the work that they're doing and about themselves. And like Chandra said, really express an interest in the person. It's hard to turn away somebody who is expressing a genuine interest in what you're doing. It's easy to turn away somebody who seems transactional, or even not necessarily turning them away, but making less of an effort to make that time to connect with them. And I also agree with Megan that it's really important to provide value back to your mentor. It has to be a two-way street. Otherwise, you're just sort of asking for things all the time and you're not providing anything. And it can be hard, I think, as a more junior person to understand what value you can provide. But just like Megan said, anything that you can do to make that person's life easier, whether that's going above and beyond to prep something for them for a meeting that they didn't ask you to prep, but based on your experience, they'll need it for the meeting. Whether it's just offering to take on additional tasks that that they'll have on their plate otherwise, even if it's somebody who, is just a little bit more senior than you, or even somebody who's really your peer, is somebody who's, a year ahead of you or a year behind you. It really can't hurt to take the time to make the effort proactively to help people out and just be nice to people. And it often will come back to you in ways that you aren't expecting.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of ties into exactly what Chandra was saying, is that it goes back to the eagerness and people's interest in something, right? If they're even taking that little extra step, it shows that they're invested in what they're doing and they want to help and they're concerned about the outcome. And it just shows that they're a little bit more invested, even if it was something as simple as printing out copies of documents and bringing it to the meeting. It just shows that a little bit of extra effort, and that makes a difference.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up all of the questions that I have for both of you. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Women's Initiative Network Real Talk. Hopefully, this discussion provided some insight into building your personal board of directors of both sponsors and mentors, and why this is vital for a successful legal career. We hope you'll join us for future episodes as we continue the Real Talk.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. We hope to have you guys join us again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Great speaking with you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please subscribe to our podcast series at lowenstein.com/podcasts, or find us on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. Lowenstein Sandler podcast series is presented by Lowenstein Sandler and cannot be copied or rebroadcast without consent. The information provided is intended for a general audience. It is not legal advice or a substitute for the advice of counsel. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. The content reflects the personal views and opinions of the participants. No attorney-client relationship is being created by this podcast, and all rights are reserved.